I'm Frank Vaughn. It's June 1st, 2025, and I have, since the beginning of the war, February 2022, I have never been more concerned about the situation in Ukraine as I am right now. And we're going to talk about that, but the title of this video was The Tale of Two Fires. So, allow me to begin this communication with the fire map. And we're looking at all these wildfires raging across Canada, and specifically in Saskatchewan. It's making a lot of noise. And these fires are very serious. But there's very little that we can do about the majority of the burning. The forest is always wanting to burn. There's a buildup of dry wood. Every 10 or 20 years before Europeans arrived in North America, the entire forest would burn. All the dry matter would burn up, and it managed itself. But we stopped doing controlled burns, and we stopped removing the dry wood, and it builds up, and inevitably you're going to get these big fires. There's nothing we can do to stop it, but there's an even bigger fire threatening humankind. We can protect homes and we can protect lives against this, but we cannot protect homes and lives against nuclear hellfire. Ukraine launches massive drone swarm attack on Russian airfields. Trump not notified in advance. Why is this attack different? The war's been going on for 2.5, 3 years. What is it about this that has me so concerned? It's actually more than 3 years now. It's 3 years, 3 months. Almost approaching that dreaded 3.5 year mark for other reasons, which I'm not going to explain right now. The fact of the matter is this was a long-range strike against Russia's strategic bomber fleet. This directly impacts their ability to project nuclear power. Now, there's a lot of people who might say they still have their submarine fleet, they still have their hypersonics. All of those things are true, but it doesn't matter. This is a threat to Russia's nuclear capabilities. A technical feat, considering how far into Russia these attacks took place. Look at how far in we are, how far from Moscow, how far from Kiev. This is a new phase of the war. And I don't know what options Russia has left. Remember, against the backdrop of this is all of your politicians clamor to blame the Russians for everything, that peace has been on the table multiple times, torpedoed deliberately by Western leaders who do not want peace, they want war. They are fomenting nuclear hellfire. And many of our politicians are applauding, as well as civilians. Michael V. Smith, we call the bluff. We will not give away Ukraine because the other guy has a big stick. Now the precedent must be set. You'll burn Ukraine to the ground. You'll get civilization ended at the same time, all because you didn't want to stop the slaughter of ethnic Russians in the east of the country. People need to understand, and we'll come back to this in a minute. U.S. presidential envoy Keith Kellogg told ABC News in a Thursday interview that Russia's concerns over NATO expansion are fair. The first Western leader to acknowledge that NATO's expansionist policies present an existential threat to Russian civilization, because it is a civilization, to the Russian nation, to the Russian people, to their view of the world, which is valid. Even if you don't think that Russia has a right to exist or Russia has a right to a sphere of influence, their nuclear weapons give them a seat at the table. They're part of the UN Security Council for a reason. They were part of the G8 for a reason. Collaboration, since the fall of the Berlin Wall, is essential, even before the fall of the Berlin Wall. The advent of nuclear arms makes collaboration the only option that humans have. I was chatting about this with some friends last night, about how the advent of nuclear weapons have changed the course of human history. That we can no longer fight it out the way that we used to. There's an anthropological rule that every 4 generations or so we do a bloodletting. Well, those days are behind us. The age of heroes is over. We are now in a new age, and we are trying to navigate it blind. Do you realize we have to go back almost 2,000 years to the time of Augustus and Augustan Rome to find a comparable time of stability for human civilization. It's a very unique spot, and it only comes to an end with nuclear war or with some type of agreement to live together and to restrict the proliferation of nuclear weapons to every single nation. Everybody wants them because it guarantees their security, or at least it's supposed to. And that is what the issue is with this Ukrainian strike, is it undercuts Russia's ability to project that very nuclear strength, which the global order relies on. And more worrying, which hasn't even really been discussed so much, is the technical capacity for Ukraine to continue to wage war at this point is completely underwritten by NATO. A NATO which increasingly means Europe and Canada, because we have aligned with Europe, and they are starting to exclude the United States from their planning because Donald Trump and his administration dare want to end this war before we have a civilization-level catastrophe. We're talking about your sons and daughters dying en masse, maybe not directly through the course of a war, but because of a supply chain collapse and a panic that the very first nuclear weapon to go off will trigger. Make no mistake about how serious this is. People are online, on X, virtue signaling, like Michael V. Smith. You're not immune from this. You're not protected from this. This is coming for you as well. This is a fire we can put out. Unlike the wildfires in Saskatchewan, which we can do very little about except protect life and property, this is an avoidable fire, and a lot of people seem to just want to trigger it. They're all out there with lighters, hoping it'll go off. Again, I must remind you, peace has been on the table multiple times. This war was completely avoidable, but we're here now because of the Michael Smiths of the world and the Bob Rays of the world. Slava Ukraini! Russia's strategic aviation fleet now joins the country's Black Sea Fleet as victims of Putin's hubris. That's an interesting take, which completely ignores why Russia's in Ukraine in the first place and all the history since 2014. Reality, truth. A truth I try to convey on this channel. Every time I talk about Ukraine, the views go down. I don't know if that's YouTube, or I don't know if people are just not interested, or if it goes over their heads. The history of this conflict, it goes back before 2014. But I can't even seem to get an audience, and not my hardcore of audience, but it's like you're trying to communicate to a much broader swath of people the history of this conflict. And it feels like it just goes right over everybody's head. How avoidable this tragedy is. 1 million dead. Totally avoidable, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. If this thing gets going the way that I fear now, for the first time since the war began, it will get going. I don't know what choice Russia has. The Kremlin dictator sowed the wind and is reaping the whirlwind. This is the tweet that Bob Ray, who is one of your government representatives, decided to retweet with Slava Ukraini. Decided to virtue signal. Now, my response was to Bob Ray that he's an idiot of monumental scale supporting a policy that could lead to the end of civilization, and I can't loathe him enough, because I can't. Bob Ray was a loathsome politician long before the war in Ukraine began. I can't even understand why this man has any continued relevance, or why 687 people, even if you deduct the entire Liberal caucus and their staffers, there's still got to be a few people that decided to interact with this thing and like it. It's disgusting. Putin's elected. He just faced election, and he won that election. Zelensky has banned the press, has banned elections, has stayed in office long since his term has expired. He has oppressed the church. He's oppressed his own people. As I've shown in previous videos, he rounds up his citizens, forces them into vans, sends them off for 3 weeks of training, and puts them on the front to die, all to prosecute a war that was completely and wholly unnecessary in the first place. Zelensky and his government, the Ukrainian state, are not innocent victims. They're agitators. They were aggressors before the war began. And taking one side over the other and not balancing our view is just leading to more madness. The Europeans, for whatever reason, and when I say Europeans, I have to include our prime minister, are desperate not only to keep this war going, but to escalate it. They would rather the world burn than see a different outcome. It's scary. You should be scared. You should be more scared of this than you are of wildfires. You should be more concerned about this than you are of wildfires. This is the fire that we can put out. Germany vows to do everything to prevent Nord Stream resurrection. You could rewrite that headline to say, Germany vows to do everything to make sure they commit national suicide. The relationship between Europe and Russia could be so good and beneficial, but they do not want to empower the Russian economy. There's been a decision made somewhere that the Russian government must go, even if it costs the world and Western civilization itself. Now, sorry about the jump cut there. I was going to do this all in one take, but I had to stop and hack my lungs up because the smoke is really thick. But all I want to say in this video, aside from everything I've said already, is whatever happens next, we have gotten this far since February of 2022 as a result of Russian restraint, not Russian total war. Their patience, in light of what was happening in eastern Ukraine, is the only reason that it took 8 years for the war to start in the first place. And I'm not trying to paint a rosy picture of Russia. It may sound like that. But I think in light of the fact that we have a culture of ignorance when it comes to the real causes, we have a culture of ignorance when it comes to the actual history of the conflict, we have a culture of ignorance when it comes to the history of the region more broadly. You can expand that out to centuries. That it's necessary to point out the evils of the Ukrainian regime and the evils of Western machinations, of NATO expansion. Who is surrounded in this conflict? It is not NATO. Taking an absolutist view of this situation is only going to lead us down a path towards total war, total nuclear war. Whatever happens next in the coming hours, probably the coming hours, maybe the coming days, I don't see how the Russians do not respond with a massive display of force. They may have lost a third of their strategic bomber fleet in this one attack. An attack that would have been impossible without Western help towards the Ukrainians. I can't see the response being restrained. Now, I mean, people are tempted to just jump straight to the conclusion that tactical nuclear weapons will be deployed. Honestly, for the first time, I can't rule it out. It's a possibility. The only point for nuclear weapons, the only reason they exist, is that there is a moment in time when a nation will use them. One of the things I highlighted with the recent spat between Pakistan and India. Pakistan has a first-use policy. They have a first-use policy because they lose a war with India quick because India has superior manpower and a huge economic advantage. The only reason nuclear arms exist is there has to be a moment where their use is required. Where are we at in the Russian calculus on their timeline towards that eventuality? They also have a number of conventional means that they haven't fully deployed in the war yet. I would argue in an effort to avoid overall civilian casualties. I think we're going to find out what escalation actually is as a consequence of this attack. I hope I'm wrong. I pray I'm wrong. And if you don't pray, it might be a good time to start. Because we're playing with a fire far bigger than the ones raging in Canada right now. We should be taking it seriously. I'm Frank Vaughn, and I'll probably see you in the next one.